The time for silence is over. Hello and welcome to The Left Speaks. My name is Chris. I'll be your host today. Today is Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2021. 1 month and approximately 1 week removed from the impeachment. 1 week removed from the insurrection. Trump was just acquitted by the Senate with the complicity and help of 43 Republican senators, all Republican. 7 switched over and decided to vote in favor. We're going to go through that reaction, what happened, why ultimately many of the Republicans chose or used as an excuse to vote against impeaching Donald Trump, or upholding the impeachment, I should say, and why they voted to acquit him. We're going to go through why that was wrong and a tragic miscarriage of justice, and unfortunately, how this sets up the United States government at a very grave risk of this occurring again in the future. I've said before, privately, I don't know if I've ever said it publicly, that I don't consider Donald Trump specifically to be the threat, although he was in this instance. I consider the threat to be somebody that's younger, smarter, and better at planning to use this as a precedent to attempt to try this again. What we saw was completely unacceptable. Sorry, I had to set that countdown timer. What we saw was completely unacceptable. We saw a sitting president at the time of the United States of America calling our elections fraudulent, claiming that the election was stolen, going 0 for 65, 67 in court, I've lost count, trying to prove those charges in front of judges that were Democrats, in front of judges that were Republicans, in front of judges that were appointed by the man himself. We've seen the results of that now with the 2 voting systems, the 2 computer companies that supplied the voting systems, suing the ever-loving hell out of the attorneys Trump had hired for defamation because they couldn't prove any of this stuff. And we're going to dive into that here in a minute as well. Not only suing the individual attorneys, but also the conservative media outlets that had a hand in spreading this lie. I think we're close to about $4 billion in damages that combined these 2 companies are seeking now. But again, we're going to dive into that in a minute. We've also seen a sitting U.S. president, again at the time, thank God he's gone, encourage and tell his supporters to march down to the United States Capitol on the same stage, on the same microphone as his own personal attorney, who had just spoken to that same crowd, saying basically that if democracy doesn't work, we should, quote, try to have trial by combat, close quote. And we wonder, how could this have happened? Who could have foreseen that a bunch of Americans, a bunch of American citizens who were told over 100 times by the president himself since the election that the election was fraudulent, that there was massive multi-statewide conspiracies going on to steal this election. Who could have guessed what would happen if Donald Trump told them all to show up on the 6th of January when Congress was going to certify these election results, and then told them to march down to the Capitol? Who could have imagined that this would have resorted into violence? Who could have imagined that telling the Proud Boys, a new fascist organization, to stand back and stand by, and being unable to consistently condemn white supremacy and white nationalism in this country, all groups that advocate for using violence in pursuit of their political aims, who could have imagined that instead of disavowing them, telling them to stand by and stand back, and then telling everybody who buys into your lies about election fraud, again, massive, multi-statewide, dozens of counties, hundreds of polling locations across all of these counties. Who could have guessed that telling all of these people over and over and over again that their election was stolen from them, that their vote didn't matter, that American democracy was at threat, at risk, and that they had to stop the steal? Who could have imagined that telling all of them to show up on the 6th of January, the one day where Congress was going to certify the results of that election, might pose a risk? And who could have imagined that telling all those same individuals, the ones who bought your lies and then traveled to Washington, D.C. on the date that you set, and then listened to speeches advocating for violence from your political supporters? Who could have imagined that telling those people in that crowd that marching down to the Capitol would resort in violence? Anybody could have imagined that. Anybody who paid attention, anybody who looked at the people he was talking to, the Proud Boys, the white supremacists, the QAnon conspiracy theorists that think that all Democrats are pedophiles, stealing adrenochrome from children for their satanic rituals. The ones who buy every lie you sell and don't bother to look at any of the evidence. The ones who think that somebody telling them a story is the same thing as evidence. Those were the people in the crowd. Those were the people Trump was specifically addressing. So yeah, if you tell me that I can talk to that crowd and they're going to believe anything that I say, maybe telling them that their democracy was stolen, that their vote didn't matter, and that it's up to them personally to stop the stealing of American democracy. Maybe telling them to march down to the Capitol wasn't such a smart idea. And maybe when you tell them multiple times that they have to fight to preserve their democracy, they have to fight to stop the steal of their votes and to stop the steal of their country, and they have to fight to keep you in office. Maybe when you say that multiple times in that speech, saying the word peacefully once isn't enough. Maybe. Call me crazy. But when you lie to the American public over 100 times, telling them that their election was stolen, call me crazy, but as the President of the United States, some of your supporters just might believe you. Call me crazy, but in every other crime that gets tried in court, you have to present your evidence. And if you want to say, hey, they presented their evidence in this case, just like the OJ trial, and he got let off on a technicality, or they didn't see the evidence. They had over 60 tries in multiple different courts. Nobody was saying he couldn't have his day in court. Hell, he had a lot more than one day. A lot more. And he failed consistently every single time to prove his case. The one case out of everything Trump submitted and filed and sued about related to the election was decided before the election even happened. His one win out of over 60 cases said, hey, in Pennsylvania, the people who observe the folks counting the ballots are currently standing 12 feet away. And we think that's too far. We would like them to be able to move closer. And the judge said, okay, that seems reasonable. Republican observers and Democratic observers can move to within 6 feet because they were both at 12 feet and then they moved to 6 feet. This happened before the counting was done. It doesn't prove a single vote, not one, was incorrectly counted. It doesn't prove a single vote, not one, was fraudulent. It proved that some of the observers must have left their eyeglasses at the house because they couldn't watch from 12 feet away. That's across a bedroom, guys. I can see what my 5-year-old is doing from across a bedroom. But hey, I've got no complaints. If you want to move everybody up to 6 feet, perfectly reasonable to me. The rest of all his wild claims, or the rest of his wild claims from his attorneys, were all dismissed. All of them, every single one. Or they withdrew them. They'd get up and talk a great game during the press conferences. Oh, we've got all this proof of election fraud. We've got this, we've got that, we've got this, we've got that. But when they got in front of a judge and were specifically asked, do you have proof of election fraud here? Well, no, that's not exactly what we're saying. That's when it got dismissed. And you want to know why? Just a wild guess on my end. Because when you get up in front of a press conference, you can pretty much say whatever the hell you want. As long as it gets aired, you can get your message out there. But as an attorney, when you get in front of a judge, your law license is on the line. If you misrepresent the facts, if you lie about what your actual claim is, you can lose your license over that. And that's why these people were just fine and perfectly okay with lying to you and lying to me. Because they didn't have a risk of any consequence, or at least they didn't think they did. But that's why when they had something at stake, when they had some skin in the game, when their livelihood and their license was on the line, if they couldn't prove it, if they couldn't substantiate their claims, if they couldn't provide evidence for what they were saying, that's why they shut up. And out of 50 Republican senators, 50, half the Senate, we had 7 willing to cross party lines. To vote saying Donald Trump was responsible for what happened on the 6th of January. was responsible for the insurrection in the Capitol. That without all these lies about the election, that without telling everybody to show up on the 6th, and that without telling those same supporters who did show up to march down to the Capitol, it would have never happened. And that's the most damning and basic thing here. I have yet to come across a conservative yet. I have yet to come across a conservative who wants to say that Donald Trump bears no responsibility in this. Everybody knows he does. You know it. I know it. They know it. That's why they want to argue about other shit. They want to try to find a way to excuse it, which we'll blow through here in a few minutes. They want to hand wave it away as First Amendment right. They want to say that impeaching a former government official is unconstitutional. They want to say that even though Trump told his supporters to march down to the Capitol, he didn't tell them to march down there and try to find Nancy Pelosi and have her hung. He didn't tell them to march down there and break into the Capitol to try to hang Mike Pence, his own vice president. So what can you do? What can you do? It failed this time. I'm speaking to the people that still think this is okay and that are trying to find excuses for it and are trying to find reasons to continue supporting the Republican Party, and that think that Democrats or socialism are the most dangerous threats to our democracy right now, instead of violence from the right wing of the Republican Party. We survived it this time. First time the United States Capitol has not been under government control, U.S. government control, since the War of 1812. We survived it this time. But look at the precedent you are setting, or have set, now that you have acquitted this former president. You are saying that there are no consequences in the final months of a president's term. That a president can even encourage his own supporters to go take over the Capitol. And what can you do about it if he fails? What if the next guy doesn't fail? What if this becomes the norm, that any president who loses an election decides to say, again without evidence, the election was rigged against me. The election was fake. We've just got to keep this going. We've just got to keep my term in office going until we can have a safe election. And don't you worry about the evidence. I'll tell you when the election is safe. I'll tell you when it's safe for you to vote again, and I'll tell you when it's safe for your vote to be counted. And if it fails, hey, no consequences for me. I'm just going to go down to my resort in Florida or my ranch in Texas or wherever the hell I feel like going. But if it succeeds, I'm just going to keep this chair right here in the White House. And I promise you, I'll keep American democracy safe. Because the majority of the people that voted against me, their vote doesn't count. Because that's how democracy is supposed to work. Republicans have opened a Pandora's box here. And a big one. And I'm seriously scared of where we go from here. Join me every Sunday afternoon for a new show where common citizens, you and I together, discuss with each other issues of today, where we demand proof and evidence is required, where we seek the truth and will not be silent. Join me this coming Sunday afternoon and take part in America's oldest and most honored tradition.